Welcome to Ironically Serious, Kate.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm so excited you're here. It's crazy because most people I have on, I have had more interactions with online, either they're past clients or friends or client of a client type of situation. But whenever we got connected on Instagram, I was instantly drawn to, I don't know, you just have like a big sister energy that you just seem like you've lived a lot of life. So I was like, I need you to come on and share all the things. And also because you're an expert in a topic that I think so many of us struggle with as entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I felt like an instant connection too. I remember when we first connected, I remember seeing like your profile pic and being like, she has tattoos too, and like I was like, this is my kind of person.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Why don't you tell people who you are who don't know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Kate Lenihan. I am the founder of Rise Hire Consulting, and I'm a hiring and training consultant. So I've worked in online marketing for about 10 years, and I've worked with some really amazing female business owners in the space, and I've matched hundreds of clients with their ideal VA. Some of which are still together at this very day, like so 7 years later. So it's
Wow.
really been an amazing ride. And I started working online when I was pregnant with my second kiddo. And when we put pen to paper, my husband and I put pen to paper, we were really broke at the time. I was working part time as it was. And when we put pen to paper, it was like, there's no point in me going back to work. And
Mhm.
so I set out to find a legitimate way to work from home. And here I am 11 years later.
My goodness, I was just about to ask you when was that when you actually started working in the online space? So 11 years ago?
Yeah, I was 2014.
Oh my gosh, which is nuts to think, because I feel like every year the digital space, regardless of what you're in, but if you're in an online business or community, it changes so rapidly. So to think that you've been in this space for a decade, I'm sure you have seen just so many trends and ebbs and flows in that time.
It's been a wild ride. I've seen so many like influencers, right?
Mhm.
Like ebb and flow and rise and fall and kind of like come up and then kind of recede. And so it's been a really interesting front row seat to everything for sure.
Yeah, which we're going to get into so many of your experiences with, previous entrepreneurs you worked with and also some advice and things. But what would you say has probably been like your maybe biggest takeaway, I think, from working in the online space that keeps you here versus going back out into the world or like a corporate setting?
Oh, I mean, it's hard to pick just one. I
Yeah.
think the flexibility is a really big one. You know, my kids are now 13 and 11,
Hmm.
um, and so the flexibility is a big one for me. But what I really love about my time in the online space has been the autonomy and the creativity that
Mm.
you are encouraged and more so just expected to explore as you navigate the role that you're working in or the organization that you're working for or nuanced solutions that might need to be implemented for a better customer experience or a marketing tactic. I mean, I think the creativity and like the collaboration with
Hmm.
entrepreneurs has been such a game changer for me and kind of opening my eyes to what was possible for my own life.
Yeah. Do you have a background in some kind of art or creativity at all?
I don't. I was an English major in college. I minored in communication. And
Okay.
then I was like, should I go get my master's degree and be a teacher? And
Mm.
then my like 20-year-old brain was like, nah. And I went to broadcasting school.
Okay.
So I went to broadcasting school thinking I was going to be like a voiceover actor or a news anchor. And that obviously didn't happen. So I kind of worked a bunch of odd jobs, like administrative, office manager type things, until I really found my place in online marketing.
Okay. So with broadcasting though, you probably had to learn how to speak really well.
Um, yes, and right. So
Okay.
like I've all my I grew up, my mom, my dad, my grandma, they all hammered me my entire life with it's not mitten, it's mitten, right? So like
Mm,
in the Friends episode where they make fun of Ross for like pronunciating things.
that's you.
And they would always make me like look up words if I didn't know something, right? Like back before Google. Hello, I'm that old. And um so that what like that helped me be well spoken and articulate, I think, ultimately. And then the English major and the communication minor also really helped. And my dad was a really funny guy. Like he used to do accents and like tell these really ridiculous jokes all the time. And so I just picked that up. Like so I naturally like have always been a jokester and like do silly accents and stuff. So like doing things with voiceovers seemed really fun.
Mhm. That's so cool because you seem very well spoken, but I mean, yeah, the English and communications major and also just working in the online space, I feel like my speech podcasting has also helped because listening to yourself afterwards and you notice all of the things, the iterations and the filler words, but I think being an entrepreneur and being forced to get on stories and have calls and Zoom calls where no one else is telling you what to say and how to say it, you have to become well spoken if you want to be successful, especially as a leader or an authority figure.
Absolutely. And the filler words, it's so funny because my husband was making fun of me the other day for saying like too much and it
Mhm.
pissed me off so bad. So I was like, there you go, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just said it again. But now I really try to, and I try to do this anyways, but I try to pause
Mhm,
instead of
mhm,
using a filler word. So oftentimes when I'm on a Zoom call, I'll look off into the distance as I'm
mhm.
trying to grab my words. So
I'm
just one
the
of those funny
same
things.
way. Yes, the first couple episodes I of this podcast 2.5 years ago. Yeah, 2.5 years ago, I recorded it and I was just trash. It was trash because of all the likes and the things, and I do this like a little mouth, I don't even know what you call it, a smack almost. And so I've had to train myself to, like you said, pause and slow down and be intentional. It's very challenging.
It really is, and I think sometimes people are wondering if I'm zoning out and daydreaming or if I'm just taking a moment to collect my thoughts.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up your dad because you shared something pretty deep with me on, when you were coming into the podcast and sharing a little bit about your life. And I would love to talk about it because, this podcast, while we get into things like business and all of that, it really started because I wanted to talk about the hard shit in life and how it
Mhm,
makes us better humans, better moms, better business owners. And you shared that you lost both of your parents in the last decade to
mhm,
alcoholism, which is that sucks. Sorry. That
mhm.
is just so shitty. And imagining you also becoming a mom in that time, how hard that could be, because I'm very close to my mom and I'm raising my kids and I call her for literally everything. So I would love for you to kind of share what navigating that grief has looked like in your personal development as a mom and then from that business side, like how have you managed all of that while growing a business and really stepping into your motherhood?
Oh, it's been such a journey. So we and I have to think about the best place to start. And so, my husband and I and our kids lived in Colorado. I'm originally from the East Coast. And in 2014, things were really starting to just kind of spiral with my dad and his girlfriend at the time called and was like, I can't do this anymore. And so we made the decision to sell our house in Colorado, move back to Connecticut. And my daughter at the time was less than a year old.
Mm,
And everybody else had kind of given up on my dad. So I not only was a brand new mom to two kids that were under 3 at the time. They're like barely 2 years apart, but everybody had kind of given up on him. And so we got back and I had the flexibility in my schedule where I was working 25 hours a week. I had I think 2 clients at the time and I was the one who was always available to go do wellness checks,
mhm,
to go if we wasn't answering the phone, if we didn't know where he was, I would have to kind of navigate that with two kids in a car seat that I would leave strapped in while I had to do what I had to do. And navigating that, right, working from home gave me the flexibility and in schedule to be able to try to care for him.
Mhm.
And it also made navigating and growing my virtual assistant career at the time and navigating motherhood really, really challenging.
Mhm.
And so that went on for about 2 years before he passed away. And that was, that was really rough. We had to, I had a friend of his who lived closer to him than I did at the time go do a wellness check. They discovered him
Mm.
deceased, had to call 911. I had to go identify the body. It was really, really rough. And I didn't deal with my grief
Mm.
after he passed away. I didn't. I buried myself in more work. I tried to just kind of white knuckle my way through it. I didn't have time. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the desire. I didn't know how to process my grief. And I was, as far as I was concerned, I was too busy
Mhm.
to even think about what that might look like. I was growing a career. I was working for a very well known entrepreneur at the time. And he passed away in the middle of a launch for her.
Oh my
So
gosh.
so my people pleasing nature was like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired too. Like it was just a whole cluster. And uh, so I didn't deal with the grief. And what that did in my early parenting journey was it made me angry.
Mm.
And I say, even to this day, like, I wish so much, as so many of us maybe do at some point or another during parenting, that I could go back and change things because I was too consumed at work and I was didn't know it, but I was consumed with my grief. And so my hairline trigger to get angry with spilled juice or squished goldfish was a hairline trigger. And
Mhm.
I also barely remember the early, early years of my kids being toddlers, all the giggles and all the laughs. I didn't allow myself the time and the space to be present in that.
Mhm.
And I have big, big regrets about it. Like I talk about it with my own therapist all the time. Um, and so so that happened with my dad. Didn't deal with the grief. And then a year on the 1 year anniversary of his death, my mom was in the ICU
Mm.
because of complications from her own alcoholism. And they were divorced. They were very good friends, but they were also very codependent. And even though they were divorced, my mom didn't know how to cope with her grief either.
Mhm.
So she, on the 1 year anniversary of my dad's death, my mom was in the ICU, and that was kind of the beginning of the spiral for her. And my mom just passed away at the very, very end of 2022. And watching her decline, I finally started to allow myself to feel the grief.
Mhm.
Not only for watching her decline and for grieving somebody who was still alive, right? It's like watching an alcoholic or an addict or even somebody who isn't self inflicting, watching somebody decline is a special kind of grief, right? Like that
Mhm.
complex grief of like they're here, but you also know they're not here or they're a shell of who they were.
Mhm.
That complex grief is, in my opinion, the hardest thing, right? And I was so angry at my mom too. I was like, God, like we just lost dad. Like, what the heck? Like, aren't we enough? Aren't we enough to choose to quit? Like, aren't we enough? Aren't your grandkids enough? Am I not enough? I had all these like questions. I was so angry. I had to put boundaries into place. Um, and I finally started to allow myself to feel the grief. And through feeling my grief and through processing my grief or starting to process my grief, I I would tell my therapist, like, "I don't wanna process this," because, like, processing it makes me more mad or more
Mhm.
sad or more angry or whatever, and she's like, "Well, yeah, that's the point because 'cause you've just pushed, 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 and it's gonna come out one way or another." And so I finally started dealing with it, and then, uh, my working relationships started to get better. I wasn't always so
Mm.
triggered with work or making a mistake or when my kids spilled something. Like, it sounds so silly. And I started to also pay more attention to the actual effect I was having on my kids and what they
Mm.
were doing and what they were absorbing. And I started apologizing more to them
Mm.
because it wasn't their fault. And so if
Mhm.
I lashed out or I was triggered or I yelled, I would always go back to them and I would say, "Listen, I did not deal with my big feelings the right way. I'm sorry. I will work on doing better."
Mhm.
And so it's practice in our house now to really, eyeball to eyeball when somebody's talking to you. We put down the phone, we look away from the computer screen, we close the laptop, whatever it is, and we do eyeball to eyeball. And if I yell or my husband yells or we have a outsized reaction to something that didn't need to be, an overreaction, if you will, we apologize for it and we take ownership for it. Because what I had said to my brother during everything was like, I feel like I have all of the reactions of an alcoholic, but I don't.
Mm. Mhm. It's all the
And
trauma.
yeah. And he was like, yeah, that sucks. Like, he lived in California. I was the one on the front lines dealing with everything.
Mhm.
So he got all my venting phone calls. I was like, I'm like the alcoholic. I'm ruining my kids because I'm trying to grow this career and I'm trying to take care of our parents or one at a time, and it's not working. Something's got to give. And so I was in just a chronic state of fight or flight forever. And I don't know if you know the Enneagram personality assessments.
Mhm.
I'm a 2, which is like the supportive helper.
Mhm.
But my almost identical score is a 1, which is a perfectionist, and so I didn't let any balls drop. I let
Mhm.
me drop as the person, right? Like my health or my mental well-being, I let that drop, but I didn't let anybody else see that anything else dropped.
Mm.
Was nice. The meals were always cooked, everything was always clean, then my work was turned in. But people noticed, right? Like, people started to notice, and I started making mistakes, and I started yelling at my kids, and like all these things, just they will come out whether you want them to or not.
My gosh, so many parts of your story I resonate with. I haven't had, knock on wood, any adult trauma as of now, but I had a pretty traumatic childhood. But it's so
Mm,
interesting to see how I've experienced a lot of those same fight or flight personality traits, you can even call it, like the perfectionism, or to me, same thing, work. Like if I can just work it out, I'll just focus on my business. And it's almost like you're drowning all these other things away. But I think what's beautiful about your story and my story, and I'm sure a lot of people who can relate with whatever kind of trauma they've been through, especially if you're a mom, is that self-awareness to realize that, okay, I am doing these things and I want to change. Like that is everything. Because that's exactly how you're able to identify that you want to change or you need to change. And even just with the apologizing piece that you mentioned, we've been practicing that with our kids, and mine are 10 and 5. But my 5-year old is very emotionally driven and just very like
mm,
hasty, and he's got this, I call him passionate, he's very passionate, and so we'll like get head to head sometimes, and it sucks when I have to apologize. I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't yelled, or I wish I hadn't said something, or I feel that mom guilt. But that
mhm,
awareness, I think, is what's teaching him, like you are with your kids, of it's okay to mess up, but you have to have the awareness to make amends and then work on fixing it. And that is like such an important piece that I think a lot of us, we're intimidated by it because that's us identifying that we're not happy with some part of us and we do have to actually put in work to change it.
Yes, that's and I don't want to presume anything about your childhood, right? But like my childhood was always like, nope, we put on our happy face and everything's fine. We don't talk about the bad stuff, we don't talk about hard stuff. So right now with the self-awareness, to your
Mhm.
point, we tell our kids it's okay. It's normal to feel
Mhm.
angry. It's normal to feel X feeling. It's how we react to it
Yep.
that matters. And we could sometimes be really angry and yell and lash out, and we have might have to come back and make an apology if that happens.
Mhm.
And you might feel really sad and go in your bedroom and cry for a little while, and that's okay too. My generation was kind of raised on this like toxic positivity of like
Mm.
everything's great. And I think finally we're all as parents starting to slowly turn it around, perhaps a little too much in one direction, but listen, I'll take that over the like strong arm, like stoic, whatever. Like I'd much rather have emotionally intelligent
Yes.
population than people who are just constantly white knuckling their way through anything that
Yes.
they're feeling.
Yeah. Did you have any, you mentioned therapy, but did you have any other, like, actual tools that you were using at the time to when you started identifying that you to work on the trauma you were going through? Like, how were you managing that?
Um, well, it took me longer than I would like to admit to actually start therapy.
Mhm.
I don't think I started therapy until probably like 2021. I had like dabbled in therapy here and there, but like I hadn't found somebody I really connected with, um and I didn't really know what else to do, right? Like I I had intention to go for a walk or do a
Mm.
meditation or exercise, but it just never I never prioritized it. And that was a subconscious choice probably. Like I wanted to do it in theory, but when it came time to actually do it, I was too drained mentally, emotionally, energetically. I was just too drained to do any of it. So I just sat in it. Um so no. I
Yeah.
just like strong armed my way through it. It was hard. It was a very very hard time. It was um I can almost still feel like how tight and tense my body was during that time,
Mm. Mhm.
um, because everything was just like clenched.
Yeah, yeah, and that is it's always the hardest part is just starting those things, and it very much is a discipline because you're yes, you want to do it, but it's not fun. It's not fun working through your shit, and, people make it seem like, "Oh, just start therapy," and it's like, "Oh, no, actually, it's probably going to be just as tough as the thing you went through to go through it all again and bring it all up and, like, actually do the work and go make apologies and amends with yourself and with your loved ones. So,
Mhm.
I don't think it matters when you do it. I think it's just that you start somewhere, whether it is meditation or a run or a therapy or whatever, you have to do. That's the most important part is that you like just start it at some point and it's going to be
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah, because then you have to face it all. Like, you have to,
Mhm.
like not only do you have to bring it back up, but you actually have to, like, stare it in the face and
Mhm.
decide where its place is in your life,
Mhm.
how big a space you're gonna let it have, or and just recreating new pathways in your brain to
Yes.
to try and figure it out. And one thing I was very clear on though was despite all of this stuff, right? And I'm I'm not going to compare, but one thing I was very clear on was I don't want any of this to make me bitter. I want
Mm.
it to be better. I want it to make me better. I want it to make me more compassionate. I want it to make me more empathetic. I want to make it so that I connect more deeply with others instead of superficial relationships. That's what I wanted to walk away with. That because I had lost, and despite my loss, I still wanted to connect deeply with people because everybody has a story and
Mhm.
everybody has something they're navigating that has shaped them in some way.
Yeah. And I think with the online space, and especially us women, because this is, we bear all the time, especially for moms, we always bear all the burdens. And in the online space, I think we don't talk about it. We don't talk
Mhm.
about things that we're going through, because we're fearful of what people think of us. I've talked about this recently on an episode where you don't want people to think you're not capable of your job, or maybe I shouldn't hire her because she's going through something, when in reality, that's what helps us create bonds and relationships with people, is when we are vulnerable and when we are open to sharing, and you realize, like, hey, seven other people I'm talking to are going through something similar, or they're dealing with something right now as well, and it's okay to talk about those things and utilize them in your business or in your networking to create relationships and not to
Mhm.
hide from it, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I think, listen, like, what if it's a working relationship, right? Like, you don't want somebody who's going to dump on trauma dump on you in any
Mhm.
way. But also, like, knowing that those who have been through their own journey, however intense, it it has given them skills that likely equip them to
Oh,
do
yeah.
the job that they've signed up to do.
Mhm.
And this is not always the case. I'm making a generalization, but I always say, when you're hiring somebody, hire somebody who you want to go have coffee with or go have a cocktail with, or who you would go to happy hour with at the end of the day, because you're going to spend a lot of time with this person communicating and otherwise. And so having somebody, whether you share trauma, whether you have a shared experience, something that you can connect on a human level as well as a professional and
Yep.
skill level, is so
Yeah,
important.
absolutely. We're gonna get into hiring too in a second, but I wanna ask you, what would be a piece of advice you would give to a woman who's listening right now, who is focused on her business, but she's dealing with something really hard in her personal life? What would be a piece of advice you would give her?
Um, how do I condense all of this?
Hard
I
question, I know.
I would say, uh, that you matter in your story,
Mm.
and that taking the time for you, whether that's 10 minutes a day, and you might not think you have 10 minutes a day, I guarantee you, you can find 10 minutes a day, whether you're not scrolling TikTok or you just close the door and lay down on the floor. Find 10 minutes a day, because you matter and your mental health matters. And there will come a point, if you don't take that time, where your body or your mental capacity will force you to take that time. And I
Mhm.
think that is what I wish I had had, somebody who told me that, when I was going through everything. Um, and lean on your community, right? Even if your community is one person, one good friend, or one mentor, or one woman, lean on your community, even if it's one person, because that too will end up being your lifeline.
Yeah, so true. I'm really lucky that my husband, he prioritizes fitness and health like crazy. My entire fitness journey is because of him. When I met him, I was literally drinking every day, partying, bartending. There would be nights where he would be in his garage gym working out. I'd be sitting there with a beer, just like, good job. But when I started my business, when we met, we I got pregnant quickly and I started my business, and I did not do what you just said. I did not prioritize myself. I prioritized growing my business, and I got to take the kids to school, and I got to do all these things, and I crashed and burned. It was like
Mhm.
2020, maybe 2021, I think, and I was literally going to the hospital because I thought I was having heart attacks, when it was just terrible anxiety,
Yeah.
doctor visits and heart monitors and medication, and they're like, "You're just so stressed out." And
Mhm.
we began prioritizing exercise, and it's become in our household a something we're all into now, like our kids as well, and we try to make it something we do together when we can. But, if he needs to go to the gym for an hour, because that's the way that he can come back and be a great dad and be a
Mhm.
great boss at work, and if I need to go on a run and I'm stressed out, like, we make sure that we're prioritizing ourselves first, because how can you show up as an amazing mom or boss or wife if you aren't even, taking care of yourself first. I mean, there's no way to fill a cup when your cup's empty. So I love that advice because I talk about this so much. Like prioritizing your mental health, your physical health is going to make every single part of your life better in all your relationships.
100%. And I think that this comes down to boundaries, right? Like I think
Mhm.
that especially as women, we have a very hard time saying no. We have a very hard time not going above and beyond for our spouse or our community or for our parents or for our children, and we are never on that list. And I think one thing that I
Mhm.
learned in the journey with both of my parents, my brother said this to me. He was like, "Listen, he's like boundaries can feel like shit and they can be the right thing to do." Like,
Mhm.
it's both, right? Like, boundaries, and I it's funny because I was batching my content for Instagram earlier today, and I said this
Yes.
in the reel. I was like, "Boundaries aren't saying no to work, they're saying yes to growth."
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
boundaries just give you the container to say, "No, no, I matter in this equation too."
Mhm. Yes.
Because, like you said, you can't pour from that empty cup. You can't.
Yep. A mindset shift I had, and I don't know where I heard it. I'm sure there was someone online somewhere that said this or a podcast I listened to, but I struggle with saying no and I started changing. And I've been testing it out here and there and literally how I respond to people when they tell me, "Oh, can you do this or can you have this call or can we take you want to meet for coffee or whatever it is?" And I instead of saying no because then I feel guilty saying no, I'll say, "That's not a priority for me right now." But maybe we can revisit this, in a month or what have you or whatever it might be. And it was almost like this little thing went off in my brain because for the perfectionist and me, the people pleaser, it's not me telling that person no. It's true though. It's not a priority right now. If it is a priority, I would make the time for it. And that's
Mhm.
okay. That you can't make every single person, an opportunity and thing a priority. It won't
Yeah.
work.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, oh, it's so true. It's so true. Like I could talk about this topic forever because it's still something that I struggle with. Like, um, saying no, right? And I always I love the way you said it, right? Like finding the right way to say it that works for your personality type or your brain is so important. I always again, I'm sorry, I'm going to reference Friends again. I'm sorry. You can see the yellow frame. I'm a huge Friends fan. It's ridiculous. But like there's an episode where Phoebe is like, "Oh, I wish I could, but I don't want to."
Love that. Love that
That
for her.
simple, right? Like and I'm like, good shit. Like, can I say that too? Like,
Right?
just so to the point. Like, oh, I wish I could. No, I don't want
Yeah.
to. Like that easy.
And you
Um,
know what I've realized is that people who are offended by that, that's their own issue. They got
yes,
their own shit they gotta work on if they're offended by someone saying, "It's not a priority right now, I'm sorry."
100%, 100%.
Oh my gosh, so good. We could talk about that all day, but
Gosh, I
I
know.
want to talk about your experience in your work because you shared with me that you've worked with some pretty big names in entrepreneurship, like Amy Porterfield and Sue
Mhm.
Zimmerman, which many of us know who those people are. And I would love to know what is something in those spaces or in your time in that type of work that really surprised you? Because I think as online entrepreneurs, we see those businesses and big names and influencers and we're like, "Oh gosh, I want that so bad." And I just wish my business was that big, but every business has its ups and its downs. And so what is something that surprised you in that season of your life?
Um, I think the general answer would be that and I worked with Amy Porterfield from 2015 to 2017, and I was her customer care manager. And then I started working with Sue Zimmerman in 2017, and I still do a little bit of work for her now. Um, I think that the thing that surprised me the most is that they also struggle with insecurity.
Mm.
And they also struggle with worry about scaling, about is this the right word to use? Is this the right phrase to like they struggle with the same things that I struggled with when I started out at 0 followers, like that I worry about when I'm creating reels, like who's going to judge me, right? Like and not Sue didn't really struggle with as much of the like self-consciousness as I think my observation of Amy did at that time. Um, but that was probably like the most surprising, like, oh yeah, well, they're human beings too. Like, of yeah,
Yes.
okay, cool. Like they struggle with that too. It's normal.
Yeah, right? And because we have that inner talk where it's no one else is experiencing this, or when I get to a certain level, whatever that
Yeah.
level that you make up in your mind is, right? I won't have to deal with that type of issue, or I won't have, imposter syndrome, or I won't feel nervous about XYZ. And that is just never the case because I think at every iteration of growth, whether it is professionally or personally, you experience a new set of whatever it is that you need to get through. You know what I mean? And so it might look different in that season, whatever next level you get to, but there's always going to be work to do. So it's not just
Mhm.
this switch where you become successful and all of a sudden you don't deal with the things you dealt with from day one.
Right. Exactly. Like the stress or the concern or like the tech issues, right? Like the tech issues that plague all of us. I remember being on webinars with Amy where like all of a sudden like the chat would crash or like
Mhm.
it was, and we were all like shit in the background, and she just had to like keep
Yep.
going with it. And she, I mean, talk about a good speaking voice, holy cow. Yeah, and she was just always the consummate professional. And but yeah, then afterwards she was like, oh my god, I was freaking out, da, 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 and it was just like, oh, okay, so we're all human beings.
Yes.
Excellent, got it.
Yeah, that's a great reminder for anyone at any stage of business that you're going to deal with those things. And it's just again, just like the trauma, right? It's how you handle it and how you learn from it. And then the next time you deal with it, you're a little bit more confident to navigate, oh, when shit hits the fan, I have that confidence to then get through it or, roll on or even just fake it till you make it. And then whenever the camera's down, you're like, "Oh my god, thank god."
I know. I mean, like the tech issues are so like we work in online marketing. Of course things misfire or break or like it happens all the time, and these women, right, that we look up to, they're just really good at continuing to riff while all this other
Mm,
stuff is happening in the background. I personally would probably freeze and be like, I can't multitask. Like what's happening, I wouldn't be able to do it. But these women were just, they dealt with the same things that every single one of us deals with too.
yeah. On that note of how they're handling things, I think all of us aspire to be, well, most of us, I won't say all of us, that's generalizing, but a lot of us aspire to become authority leaders. If there's an industry we're in where we really, really are passionate and we're really good at something, we are seeking some kind of authority in that space, whether it is education or just being a creator and sharing content or community. But what do you think from your experience working with those powerhouse women? What do you think really sets entrepreneurs apart who get to that level or really can handle that type of pressure?
Hmm. Uh, I think I think it's kind of multifaceted. I think one is the personality, right? Having that energy where and these two women that I've had experience with are also wildly different personalities. Like
Mm,
Amy's got that like best friend energy, like cheerleader, hype girl. Like she is just like, you can do this, right? Like big sister in the industry, right? Somebody who's going to cheer you on and have your back. Sue is like this little energizer bunny who is very charismatic and um, very like visionary and very creative. And so while they're both different, I think personality,
mhm.
to almost win people to your cause or your value proposition, what sets you apart, is one big piece of it. Knowing how to own your voice, right? How to
Mm,
own your, I think authenticity is such an oversaturated term right now, but I do think that there is truth to understanding and being able to own your authenticity when you're speaking on Instagram stories or in a reel or in your captions. Even if you're using ChatGPT, still being able to convey to ChatGPT what
who you
your
are.
voice is, what
Mhm.
your storytelling vibe is. I think that is one of the really big things that helps set people apart, right? Knowing and owning your personality and
Mm.
vibe, I guess. I think the other is just being confident enough in your knowledge to still share massive value for free,
Mhm.
in terms of what you're teaching or what you're sharing online, and knowing that even if you share massive value, people are always going to go want to go deeper on that value, and that's how
Mhm.
they will come to work with you. Because Amy actually used to always say, and it has always stuck with me, I think she said it on a webinar of hers, you want your clients to say, "Holy shit, if she's giving me this for free, I can't even imagine what her paid stuff is going to be like."
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think that, like, being confident enough that the tidbits you share, even as juicy as they might be, they will still always want more.
Yes, that is I love that because I have done that in my own business, and I have seen, you share something like for me, something very niche like Dubsado, right? Where there's just so much information people need to know to execute it. And I could sit here and put a paywall up for every little thing that I know
Sure.
because I have spent hours and hours and hours, hundreds of hours learning this stuff.
Mhm.
But when you are the expert, there's so much knowledge that it doesn't even make sense to withhold it. And so I think it kind of brings up a point as well that you really do need to become an expert in what you're wanting to pursue. And I've even seen in my own business where I've wanted to do all the things and be this and offer this and be the expert in X and Y and Z, and it's just too much. It's too diluted. And the people
Mhm.
who are successful in their industry have gotten so good at something so specific that they have endless knowledge on it. And so giving that for free, it's not the end of their knowledge bank. There's still so much more they can give. Or also it's like, they give this knowledge, but that magnetic secret sauce that they bring to it can share that knowledge in a different way than how someone may see it on a different YouTube video or a different, it's like we can say a lot of the same things, but my experiences are going to make the knowledge I'm sharing different from all of the other Dubsado people who might be saying the same thing. And that's also so important, if going to your point of your personality and how you bring in your life experiences and your story into what you teach and how you teach it. Like that is so important, I think, for brands who want to be these like cult brands almost and really be leaders. I
Mhm.
love that. I'm so glad you said that because I get discouraged when people are, like, oh, I should charge for this. And I'm like, why? Are you really gonna make much money off of a 27? Just share it for free. Just share it for free.
Well, and the other thing to that point, right, Taylor, like, the other thing to that point is you sharing this one valuable thing is only one small piece of the overall puzzle. They
Mhm.
still need you to say, "Oh, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is oh, I see where step 7, which maybe is the
Mhm.
Instagram reel you shared, fits into the overall picture now."
Yep.
So you can still offer something that is of massive value. Like my reels on my page, I'm like, "Prioritize." And people are like, "Okay, but how do I start prioritizing, or how do I da 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 da?" And I give them that information, but it's like, "Well, what point in the process do I need to prioritize
Mhm.
while I'm hiring, before or after?" Like all of it. Like that's a really maybe silly an example, but that's the kind of thing too. Is like you get to share this value, drop these like massive knowledge bombs, and then when they come to work with you, take them by the hand and say, "Okay, now I'm going to guide you through the whole process."
Mhm. So true. I've also been really interested lately in the whole idea of reciprocity. I mean, obviously, people talk about it a lot in marketing, and giving value makes people want to give back. But one thing I've just been, and I don't know, call it like one of those things where you're like, oh, they owe me a favor now. Not even in that way, but I'll have people be like, can I just get on a call with you like for 15 minutes and just pick your brain? And obviously, if it's not a priority, hey, I'm booked right now, I'm full. But when
Yep.
it's, something I'm able to handle, I just had a call the other day with someone who was a guy who like worked at my husband's job a long time ago, and he knew I was in marketing, and he's like, I just need 15 minutes for someone to explain this because I can't figure it out. And
Mm,
it was something for me that's like the easiest thing I could ever talk about, right? And he's, "Okay, what do I owe you?" And I'm just like, "Nothing, just consider it a favor," you know? However, now, and that's also an example where it's like, I don't know if that's ever gonna come back around. Maybe I believe in karma though, so maybe it will. But in those scenarios where you're building connections, like giving that value, people want to give back, whether they're gonna pay you later, whether they're gonna refer you later, whether they're gonna share something that you wrote or whatever it might be. That is
Mhm.
creating reciprocity. You can't expect people to give if you're not giving, period.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. Say it again for the people in the back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Like, I couldn't agree more. I think gatekeeping only keeps us all isolated and stuck.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
But
Yes, so good. Speaking of isolated and stuck, people who are working by themselves, AKA
what a
me.
great segue.
Yeah, what a good segue. How did you know I was gonna talk about that? So you help people figure out how to hire and when to hire and who they should hire.
Mhm.
And how do you help someone know if they're ready for that or if they really have more work they need to do before they do that? Are there identifiers? Is there like a red flag? Are there certain things that you're just like, oh, nope, you're not ready?
I think this kind of falls into two kind of schools of thought, right? Like the first is like hire before you're ready. Don't wait until you're drowning in
Mm-hmm.
tasks and all of that to hire. And I think the other is kind of like, okay, and I also understand that hiring can feel like a luxury and it can feel really risky and really scary. And like, do I really have enough? Or I don't want to take the time to train, or it's just faster if I do it myself, right? All of these things. I think when it comes to hiring in terms of markers, if somebody's ready, is really understanding where your time is being spent.
Mm-hmm.
Are you spending your time answering emails instead of having a call with a new client that's going to bring in money? Are you Googling how to fix your automation?
Mm-hmm.
Are you, like, are you just going to reply to this email real quick, honey, before you get in the car to go on a hike on a Saturday? Like, where is really becoming aware of your time and also more than just where your time is being spent, but the energy around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What tasks are you avoiding? What tasks keep getting moved to the next day or the next week on your calendar, in your planner? Or are you running from meeting to meeting to meeting and then when you get done with your meetings, you have no energy left to write the follow-up emails for recap notes? Or so I think all of that to give example towards becoming really clear on your time, auditing
Mm-hmm.
your time, and not just the time, but the energy around the time, the energy around the tasks that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. I
So
love
that's
that.
kind of my first cornerstone. Because that leads into the second marker cornerstone, which is what the clients that I typically work with have gotten their business to a certain point, right? Maybe that's their first six figures, maybe that's 20 clients. It's different for everybody. But you've scaled to this certain point and now you've kind of plateaued in your growth. You're not you keep trying but like you keep bumping up against that upper ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
That's another marker to be like, okay, I need to free up my time from the low value tasks to then allow me time to get on more sales calls or to do more one-on-one coaching or to finally build that course. So you're paying $25 an hour so that you're freed up to make $500, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the premise is yes, hiring can feel like a luxury, but also hiring should ultimately make you more money, not cost you money.
Mm-hmm.
It should help add to your bottom line, not take away from it.
Yes.
So those are my two big markers. There's a lot of like little nuanced ones, but all really kind of play into what's your mental space like on a regular basis? Like, are you excited to go to work? Or are you like, shit, I have to do all the admin work today. I have to do all the invoicing work today. All of that kind of stuff. That's not why you started your business.
Yep.
You started your business to serve in a way that only you can serve. So why are you doing all the other crap?
Mhm. Mhm. Let's say someone right now is listening and maybe they've just made their first hire, like a VA or, an
Mhm.
admin team member or something like that. What are some mistakes that you've seen in that early phase that they could avoid?
Oh, this is such a good question. I love this question. Um, I think honestly, when I think about the entire hiring process and when people hire for the first time, this is often the pivot point, right?
Mhm.
People are like, "Oh, I hired. My business is going to be fixed. Everything's good." And it's like, "Oh, nope, now actually the
Not quite.
work begins." Sorry to break it to you. Like now you actually have to put in the work. Because I would say for the first 30 to 45 days, uh, onboarding and training is the most important work you can do with your new virtual assistant. Your in an ideal world, your virtual assistant has the skills you need and is also aligned with your organization's values, vision, and mission. You don't That's a philosophy that I can get into if you want, but my firm belief is like I can teach anybody a skill, I can't teach somebody character. And I want somebody to
Mm.
be aligned with me and who I am and how I serve, more so than I care about if they can push the buttons. Because I can
Mhm.
push the buttons. I can train you how to do anything. Um, that little side note. Onboarding and training is where the magic happens. And so, my biggest suggestions for somebody if they have just hired a virtual assistant is number one, the first thing I want you to do is set a weekly meeting. Set a weekly meeting, standing time, standing day. Don't cancel on it. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half long. It doesn't have to be an hour long. If you'll get really efficient at it, and it'll eventually be 30 minutes. Um, During that meeting, that's when you go over what was accomplished last week, what's on deck for this week, and any new tasks or projects that are coming down the pipeline. And you want to talk about those very openly, very frankly, and make sure there's mutual understanding in terms of who's in charge of what that looks like, and when their deliverables are due.
Set the
So
expectations.
set the expectations. Yep. The other thing I really think is very important is, um, at the very beginning of a relationship, as you begin working with somebody, setting very clear success metrics. So
Mhm.
you both are aware of how success will be measured. So, number one, the VA doesn't feel like the goalposts are always moving, and the VA understands what is expected of them. And that you then also have a metric to say, okay, so she did accomplish what I needed her to do at least 85% of the time. So that is what I marked as success. And then the final kind of, if I had to put this into just three things, is making sure that you've passed along, even if they're super basic, SOPs, which are standard operating procedures, if anybody's not familiar. They don't have to be pretty. They don't have to be perfect. It could be the most basic checklist you've ever seen in your life as long as it exists outside of your brain. So
Mhm.
that the VA has something to start going off of that they can then continue to build out and refine as you continue your work together. Then you start to also begin to build uh, a database or an index of SOPs so that if your current VA leaves, if your current VA gets promoted, they can pass it off. Everything's
Mhm.
documented. It exists outside of somebody's head. It can continue to be refined, and it is documented so that somebody can follow it along as a checklist, which helps to reduce errors and increases efficiency.
Those are so good. So good because I was a VA. That's how my business started. So, thankfully, I am very organized. So, those things you just said, I almost helped my clients instill them as a good
Mhm,
VA can do, which I think
mhm.
is really cool that you're sharing because from a business owner perspective, those tips obviously are going to help you not only choose a great VA, but then actually be successful with them. But if you're a VA listening or you're a business manager or an admin, you can help your client that's hiring you implement those things. If you come on and there's no SOPs, hey, we should start creating SOPs. Or hey, we need to have a weekly meeting. How do I measure my success? Which I think is really important because I've heard so many people be like, "Oh, I hired a VA, it just didn't work out." And I always ask, "Well, what happened? Why didn't it work out?" A
Yes,
lot of people come to me with Dubsado stuff who had a bad client experience with a VA or have a VA and it's not going great or whatever it is, and there's not a clear reason why. It just didn't really fit, da, da, da. And well, is there any way to measure if it was successful or not? And if you don't have anything to measure, how can you know if they're the problem or if you're the problem?
yes. I think the other thing that really plays into that I've observed and experienced kind of in the industry is business owners will often hire for one role, but then expect different outcomes, right? Like they're like, "Oh, I'm hiring an admin," but then they want their admin to do social media or they want their admin to do
Mhm.
like podcast editing. And I think one thing that is very important to know is somebody who has those organizational detail oriented skills for managing your calendar and your inbox is not necessarily the same person who's going to be really tech adept and able to work on your podcast or even your social media, right? Like I know enough social media to be dangerous, but I wouldn't want to be anybody's social media manager.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think that's also kind of a little bit of a trap that business owners get pulled into is like they're like, "Oh, I hired a VA," but you didn't one VA isn't enough for all the aspects of your business.
Mhm.
And so, like, when I work with my clients, the first step we take is getting aware of their time, where they're spending their time and what tasks, what categories those fall into, like,
Ah.
and where their energy is going, so that after we do this audit of sorts, we're able to say, okay, the majority of the tasks that you need to outsource most urgently fall into the admin or social marketing category, and then we're able to then take those and turn it into a job description of sorts.
And make sure you're hiring people who actually are
Have those.
skilled in that thing
Yeah.
or have the skill sets to learn that thing. Yeah, I mean, I think it was such a shift because, after COVID, I started my VA business before COVID and I blew up during COVID because everyone was taking their business online and or they were starting new businesses or whatever it was. And, everyone was getting loans and all these things. And so people were just hiring VAs to do all the things. And, for someone like myself, it was great because I learned a lot of things. I learned what I didn't like, I learned what I did like, but it almost created this online culture where we were just a VA is this magical unicorn who just does all these things. And it's so not realistic. Not that you won't find maybe a very special person who can do a lot of those things, but it's rare. It is not the norm. But
Mhm.
somehow we've almost attached that idea to virtual assistants or business managers where they're this catch all. And that is just not realistic. And quite honestly, it's not even helpful for your business because then you're trying to have one person do all of these things that probably require knowledge and experience or special sauce that they just might not have?
100%. And I think that is another thing that I've seen that business owners specifically should be a little bit wary of, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think that there is a certain subset of virtual assistants kind of out there in the world that no matter what you ask them to do, they will be like, yes, I can do that. And they can't, or they don't know how. And so then that's also where frustration can creep in because they've done it, but it's half-assed or it's done wrong, and then you have to check it, and then you start losing trust and losing time. And look, I don't care if you can't do it, but be upfront with me. I appreciate
Mhm.
that you want to learn, and we can learn together maybe, or we can bring in a specialist just for that one project, and you can learn from them. But don't tell me you can do it if you really aren't good at it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that's the other thing to be wary of. If somebody's saying yes to everything, right? Like we were talking about earlier in a different capacity, but if somebody's saying yes to everything, that'd be a little bit of a red flag for me.
I'm so glad you said that. And it should be some encouragement, I think, for those who are on the other end who are the virtual assistant or the admins or the business managers. It's okay to say no and to help your client identify when they do need to bring in someone else or get an expert or expand the team and help them do that successfully or figure out where you sit in that. And I mean, it does take some confidence because it could be scary of like, oh, are they going to let me go because I don't know how to do that thing, when in the long run, when you do find the right person for that, it's just making the whole team and business more successful than if you were to try to take all the burden on yourself and do it all as the assistant.
100%, like 100%. Because I was a VA too. That's how I started. I had a bunch of
Mhm.
clients, and so I've been on both sides. I've been on the hiring side and I've been on the VA side. And so I want to mentor VAs as much as I want to mentor the business owners who need to know how to effectively and successfully hire for long-term success,
Long
right? Like,
term, yeah.
yeah, that long term is where the magic really starts to happen. Like, it's so funny because I caught up with a virtual assistant that I matched with a client 7 years ago, and I caught up with her this week, and she's still working for the same gentleman. Like,
That's
that's what
amazing, and kudos to
happens.
you. It shows that you're a great matchmaker.
Well, thank you. But I was just like, yes, like, and she learned a lot on the job. She was resilient. It's just, there is a special skill set, and I can't even tell you what it is because I don't know. But there are some people that I will speak to, and I'm like, that's our girl. That's who it
Mhm,
is. That's who we're hiring because, and it's just a feeling. Like there's a little tingly, sense in
mhm.
there too. So yeah.
Okay, I have one last question,
Okay.
and you've probably heard this because I have said this, and I think all of us have at some point. But what advice would you give to a business owner who is scared to delegate because they don't think anyone else can do it as good as they can do it?
Um, so many things. um, I want to say so many things. I think if my biggest thing that I would say is if you're the only person who knows how to run your business, you don't have a business. You have a job.
Ah, ooh.
Like if you're the only person that can do it, you're not going to grow. You're not going to scale. um, Despite every desire, effort, anything that you pour in, you inevitably will get to a plateau point in your business where you will have to relinquish trust or control. And I think if we are able to shift our mindset just a little bit to be like, to come away from releasing control and position it more as now I get to do fill in the blank
Mhm,
that fuels me or brings me joy. Um, that's where the shift happens,
mhm,
right? Because you're right, right? In the beginning, it does. It feels like all of that shit. It feels like I'm releasing control. They're doing it wrong. I don't think it saves me that much time. It's faster if I just do it myself. All of these things that ultimately come back to control of delegating or the fear of somebody not doing it right. And so you're right in that in the beginning, it will take longer, but in the 30 to 45 days. And then after that,
mhm,
what do you get to now do to grow to that next level that you've been pushing for however long? So that'd be my little like snarky, like, if you're the only person who knows how to do it, then it's not a business.
mhm. Yeah, and I'll add too, I think that it's also kind of like you were saying with the energy of what brings you joy. If that little task does bring you joy, then you should do it. You don't have
Yeah.
to hand it off. If responding to all of your DMs is how you connect with your people, that doesn't need to be handed off then. So you can do the things that you actually do well and don't need to hand off, but you get to choose that. And I love that you mentioned the audit of that's how you figure out what those things actually are is by
Mhm.
identifying and auditing and writing it all down and tracking all of it, which I really need to do that. Yeah.
It's really like I'm working with a few clients right now, and they all had resistance to this time and task audit that I force everyone to go through. And then on the other side of it, they were all like, "Oh shit, yeah, like no wonder I have to I can't find more brand deals or partnerships
Mm,
or create the course because you're saying yes to too many things." And yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to take from you what does bring you joy. No, that's not the point. That's why we categorize. That's why we look at the energy rating as well as the task. Right? Like
Mm,
Sue, Sue did not want to hand off her DMs at all. So we
mhm,
didn't make her in her business, right? Like she continued to respond to the DMs. And but we would she was like, take my calendar, take my inbox, right?
mhm.
Like all of those things. So we're not going to force you to hand off anything that you don't want to hand off.
I actually just thought of one more question.
Yes.
What about for the people who, and I mean, I'm kind of speaking for myself because I've had one assistant and she served me well. She worked with me for like 2 years and then she started her own business. And I was like, that's a freaking win because she started without a business and then she was so inspired and knew all these things. I was like, go, sis, like go blossom. And I
I
haven't
love
had help since. And I think one thing that I struggle with, and I'm sure other people do, and maybe this is more of a money mindset question, but like the financial side, right? What do you say to people who are scared of the investment, the actual
that.
investment of bringing on a team member because it's like you've said it's not something where you should just be bringing it on and then it's a short-lived relationship. You want to make that relationship last if you want to see it be successful, which in turn means you're investing money into that. So what is your kind of what do you say to those people who are struggling with the investment side of it?
Um, the shortest answer to that is hire starting at 5 hours a week,
Mhm.
right? So if somebody's $25 an hour, even if they're $30 an hour at 5 hours a week, you'll be surprised at how much can be done in only 5 hours a week. And that's a small investment. Now, some virtual assistants prefer to charge like a retainer package. And so the beautiful thing about hiring a virtual assistant is it's not a W-2 employee, it's a
Mhm.
1099 contractor. And there's space for negotiation. There's different ways to pay people. If you are truly concerned about an investment option, there are inexpensive options that you can look into in terms of outsourcing from overseas.
Mhm.
There are so many options that I would say fit almost any budget. And then the other thing I will tie this back to is that the investment ultimately should be helping you to build your bottom line. So if you're paying somebody $500 a month and that's 10 hours a week, like I'm making it up because I can't do math in my head, so forgive me. I have to get paper and pen out. But if let's
Me too.
say you're paying them $500 a month and that frees up 10 hours a week for you, the business owner. And now you're able to take two more sales calls a week. That's eight more sales calls a month, right? If
Mhm.
you have a 30% close, you close what? Two and a half of those, right? Is that there ish 30%? Even if you close 20%. And let's say your coaching package is $2,500. Well, you just made
Mhm.
5,000, but you only paid out 500.
Right.
So you made more money than the investment you made in your virtual assistant. Now that's not going to happen right out of the gate, but that's the goal is that your
Mhm.
virtual assistant is making you money, not costing you money.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I'm feeling like I've been called out.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah,
Asking for a friend,
the
right?
listeners wanna know, AKA me. It's scary,
It
it's
is.
and it's hard, like you said, it's hard to release control, or I
Mhm.
think for myself, I'm someone who just is like, "I can handle everything," but that doesn't mean I should. you know?
Say
Doesn't
it
mean I
again.
should.
Say it again. Say it again for me. Say it again.
Doesn't mean we should, you know? And I
Yeah.
think it's also just what I'm learning now is, for example, I want to be able to go to the gym in the morning. But then if I go to the gym in the morning, I only have a 3-hour workday. Well, what if the first 2 hours someone else was doing the work? So I could
Mhm.
go, exercise and show up to work happy and show up to my family happy. So I think there's, yeah, so
Yeah.
many benefits, but it is, I think, for a lot of people scary. That's just bottom line, is scary, but so is business in general. So hello,
That's
we're all
it.
here doing the same thing. We're all
Yeah,
scared.
we're all here, and I think, like, being here and doing it anyways, doing it scared, that's the win.
Hmm.
That's the big win.
Agreed. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Kate, I love you. You're amazing. Thank you so
Oh,
much for sharing so openly too about just you and your past, but then also giving such helpful advice, because I think so many of my people are in that stage where they're growing and they are just trying to figure out how to be successful and how to manage it all. And so, where can people find you? And do you have anything cool going on right now or any offers that you want to share with the listeners?
I you can find me on Instagram. That's where I typically live. My Instagram page is Rise Hire, but it's hire spelled like you're hiring somebody, not
Higher
actually.
up. Mhm.
Yes, it's a play on words. It's like like I
I love
realize
it.
now that because I have to explain it, maybe it wasn't the smartest choice, but Rise Hire Consulting is where I am on Instagram. So come give me a follow, drop a comment or a hey in my DMs or on my latest post. I've got a free resource if you want it. It is 3 key signs you're ready for a virtual hire, and how to crush your to-do list and like or take 20, I don't know, there's like a subtitle and I can't remember it right now, but when you DM me I will send it to you so that you have it, you can fill it out. It's a nice little PDF. It'll help you to start to audit your time and then get
Perfect.
going.
And then, are you taking on clients right now?
I am taking on clients right now. I welcome clients. I love working with clients. It's my favorite thing about what I do is just being able to help somebody empower themselves
Mhm.
to not only ask for, but also lean into the help that they deserve.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for being here.
Thank you so much, Taylor. It has been such a pleasure.